You need to find somewhere else to live, Dad. Honestly, it's just too much. Carol and I need our space. That's what my son said to me on a Tuesday evening in March, 6 weeks after my hip surgery, while I was still using a walker to get to the bathroom. I nodded, said nothing, and went to bed early. What he didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that I had already been planning to leave. I just needed to hear those words first, and I took $11 million with me when I went. Before I go any further, please subscribe to the channel and drop a comment telling me what time it is where you are right now. The surgeon's report sat on the nightstand where I'd left it 3 days earlier. Right hip replacement, successful procedure, 12 to 16 weeks of recovery recommended. At 67 years old, I'd handled it the way I handled everything, quietly, practically, without drama. Arranged the surgery myself. Arranged the post-op care myself. Arranged to move into my son's house in Scottsdale temporarily, or so I believed, because my own condo in Tempe had 3 flights of stairs and no elevator. My son Daniel was 41. His wife Carol was 38. They had a 4-bedroom house in a golf community with a guest suite on the first floor, wide hallways, no stairs, perfect for recovery. Daniel had suggested it himself when I called to tell him about the surgery. Dad, just come here. We have the room. Don't be stubborn about it. I wasn't being stubborn, I was being careful. There is a difference. I'd been retired for 4 years by then, sold my manufacturing business, a precision parts company I'd built over 31 years in Mesa, Arizona, to a private equity firm out of Denver. They paid me well for it. Very well. But nobody in my family knew exactly how well, because I had never told them. Daniel thought I'd gotten around $2 million for it, enough to retire comfortably. That was the number I'd mentioned once, casually, years before the actual sale, when the business was worth roughly that. I never corrected the assumption. In fact, I quietly encouraged it. The real number was different. The PE firm had wanted my customer contracts as much as my machinery. 30 years of relationships with aerospace suppliers and defense contractors don't come cheap. They paid $11.4 million, after taxes and fees. I invested it carefully and let it grow. By the time I moved into Daniel's guest suite with my walker and my physical therapy schedule, the portfolio sat at $11,200,000 and change. I'd been playing the modest retiree for 4 years, living in a mid-range condo, driving a 5-year-old pickup, splitting appetizers at restaurants. Not because I was cheap, but because I was watching, testing, seeing who my son and daughter-in-law really were when they thought the money was ordinary. The guest suite was fine at first. Daniel checked in on me each morning before work. He was in commercial real estate, good income, comfortable life. Carol managed their social calendar and a lifestyle blog with 40,000 followers where she posted about home design and clean eating. She was polished and pleasant and maintained a careful distance from me that I'd noticed long before the surgery. I paid them $1,500 a month in cash from the first week. Insisted on it. Daniel said it wasn't necessary. I did it anyway, partly because it was fair, mostly because I wanted to see how they accepted it. They accepted it the way people accept a parking validation: useful, unremarkable, expected. 2 months in, I overheard the first conversation. I'd been moving better by then, down to a cane, sleeping lighter than I used to. Their bedroom was at the end of the hall. I was coming back from the kitchen around 11 at night, glass of water in hand, when I heard Carol's voice through the door. Not muffled, clear. How much longer, Daniel? I'm serious. My mother is asking if she can come stay for the summer, and I can't exactly tell her the guest suite is permanently occupied by your father. Daniel said something low that I couldn't make out. I know he had surgery, Carol continued. He's fine now. He walks to the mailbox every morning. He goes to PT 3 times a week. He is not an invalid. He is just comfortable here, and he's not motivated to leave, because why would he be? We're convenient. A pause. Then, he's your responsibility, not mine. I signed up to be your wife, not a caretaker for an old man who could afford his own place if he really wanted to. I stood in the hallway. The tile was cold under my feet. The water glass was sweating in my hand. Daniel's voice again, clearer this time. Carol, give it a little more time. I've given it 2 months. The blog shoot is in 6 weeks, and I need that room. Just tell him, be honest. He'll understand. He's a grown man. I walked back to my room, set the water glass on the nightstand, sat on the edge of the bed in the dark the way I used to sit after long days at the plant when a contract fell through or a machine line went down. Steady, processing, planning. An old man who could afford his own place. She wasn't wrong about that. She just didn't know the half of it. I didn't sleep much that night. By morning, I'd made 3 decisions. First, I would leave on my own terms, not because Carol wanted her guest suite back for a photography shoot. Second, I would do it in a way they would remember. Third, I would call my estate attorney, Margaret Holt, as soon as the office opened. Margaret had handled my business sale and the subsequent trust structures. She was 62, sharp as a scalpel, and had known me for 20 years. When I told her what I was planning, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "How much do you want them to feel it?" I said, "Enough that they learn something permanent." She said, "I'll clear my afternoon." I spent the next 2 weeks moving slowly through my days as if nothing had changed. PT appointments, morning walks, helping Carol carry groceries without being asked, playing the grateful, recovering father-in-law who was trying not to be a burden. Meanwhile, I was online every evening after they went to bed, searching real estate listings in North Scottsdale, Paradise Valley, Arcadia, areas they'd recognize as money. There was a house on a cul-de-sac in Arcadia that stopped me cold on a Thursday night. Single story, built 2018, 4 bedrooms, a courtyard with a fountain, a kitchen that had more counter space than my entire condo, listed at $680,000. Sellers had already relocated to Portland. Property had been sitting for 3 weeks. I called the listing agent at 8 the next morning, told her I was interested in a cash purchase and could close in under 2 weeks if the sellers were motivated. Her voice changed register immediately. Cash? Yes. Under 2 weeks? If the paperwork cooperated. When can you see it? I drove there alone that afternoon, parked in the cul-de-sac and sat for a minute looking at the house. Desert landscaping, clean lines, a covered patio facing the backyard mountains. It looked like the kind of place a man builds toward, not a place a man gets sent to because his daughter-in-law has a blog shoot. I toured it in 40 minutes. Made a full-price offer before I left the driveway. My private banker, a man named Gerald who had handled my accounts since the business sale, wired the funds within 48 hours. He asked what I was buying. I told him a fresh start. He laughed and said that was his favorite kind of transaction. I signed the closing documents on a Wednesday, got the keys on a Friday, said nothing to Daniel or Carol. The Saturday I chose to leave, they were both home. I waited until after breakfast, until Carol was on a call in her office and Daniel was cleaning the garage. I had already packed most of my things over the preceding week. A box here, a bag there, carrying things to my truck during morning walks. Nothing dramatic, just systematic. I wrote a note on a sheet of paper from the notepad on the kitchen counter. I left it on the kitchen island where they would see it when they came in for lunch. Daniel, I found my own place and have moved out as of this morning. Thank you for the use of the guest suite during recovery. I've left this month's payment on the counter. I heard what Carol said about the old man who could afford his own place. She was more right than she realized. Dad! I put $1,500 in cash under the note, not because I owed it, because I wanted the note to sit next to something concrete. Then I drove to Arcadia with the last load of my things in the truck bed, the radio on, windows down, the March desert warming up around me. My hip was fine, had been fine for weeks. I'd been waiting for the right moment. Now I had one. The house was quiet when I arrived. Bare floors, echoing rooms, morning light coming through the east-facing windows in long flat bars. I set down the box I was carrying and stood in the kitchen for a moment. The fountain in the courtyard was already running. I'd had it turned on before I signed the final papers. It made a sound like something patient and continuous. I made a list of furniture I'd need, called a local shop that did same-week delivery, ordered a bed, a desk, 2 good chairs, a coffee table. Simple. I'd add things over time. That evening, Daniel called. I let it go to voicemail. His message was 5 sentences. Dad, I got your note. I don't know what to say. I didn't know you'd heard that. Carol feels terrible. Please call me back. I listened to it twice. Then I texted Margaret. Ready for phase 2. She already had the documents prepared. A certified letter, drafted on her firm's letterhead, addressed to Daniel's home address, sent the following Monday. It outlined the terms of a promissory note he had signed 2 years earlier. That note required some explaining. 2 years before the surgery, Daniel had called me in a state of controlled panic. A commercial property deal he'd been putting together was $200,000 short of closing. He needed bridge financing for 60 days. 90 at the outside. He'd pay me back with interest, he said. It was a sure thing. He just needed someone to move fast. I had moved fast. I had also brought the paperwork which my attorney prepared, which outlined a loan of $200,000 at 4% interest, due in full at the end of a 2-year term. Daniel had glanced at the pages, signed where I pointed, and thanked me enormously. The property deal had closed. He'd paid me back $50,000 over the following year, then the payments had gradually stopped as other expenses took priority. A kitchen renovation. Carol's car. A vacation to Italy. The 2-year term expired in 11 days from the date of the certified letter. The remaining balance, plus accrued interest, was $162,000. Daniel called within an hour of the letter arriving. I could hear it before he said a word, the particular tightness of a man who has just opened something that changed the shape of his afternoon. Dad, this letter from your attorney. I know what it says. You're actually calling in the loan? Dad, you never said anything about... There was nothing to say until the term ended. Now it has. $162,000 in 60 days. We don't have that sitting around. I know. A pause. Is this because of what Carol said? Because she said she feels terrible about that? And it's because the contract term expired, Daniel. That's what contracts do. He was quiet for a moment. Can we talk about this in person? Come over for dinner. I'm busy this week, I said. Margaret will handle correspondence. Talk to her office if you have questions about the timeline. I hung up and went to sit in my courtyard. The fountain was running. The light was going gold over the mountains to the east. A neighbor was walking a dog somewhere nearby, and the dog's tags jingled at regular intervals and then faded. I poured a glass of iced tea and thought about my son at 41, the age I'd been when I landed my first major aerospace contract. I'd worked 16-hour days for a month straight to fulfill it. Daniel had grown up watching me work that way, but had absorbed something different from it than I'd hoped. Over the next 3 weeks, I received 14 calls from Daniel and 6 from Carol. I answered 2 of them, both from Daniel, both brief. He told me they'd applied for a home equity line of credit and been approved for $80,000. He told me Carol was selling jewelry and designer items online. He told me they'd borrowed $30,000 from Carol's parents. He told me he hadn't been sleeping. I listened. I didn't apologize. I said I hoped things were coming together. What I didn't tell him was that Margaret had also made a quiet call to a mutual contact in the Scottsdale real estate community, someone who knew everyone and repeated things accurately. The story she shared was simple and factual. A retired business owner had been asked to leave his son's home during post-surgical recovery because his daughter-in-law wanted the guest room back for a photography project. He had since purchased his own home and was calling in a legal debt. The story was accurate. The story spread. Daniel's colleagues heard versions of it. Carol's lifestyle blog, which had been growing steadily, began receiving pointed comments. "How's your father-in-law doing?" Appeared under a post about organic kitchen organization. "Karma is patient." Appeared under a post about setting intentional boundaries in your home. She deleted both. Others followed. Carol posted a statement about navigating private family matters with grace, which was the worst thing she could have done. Screenshots circulated. Her follower count dropped 14% in 2 weeks. She called me on a Tuesday afternoon. I answered because I was curious. "Silas," she said, using my first name the way she always had, as if we were peers meeting at a fundraiser. "I want to explain. About what I said, about what you heard." "You don't need to explain," I said. "You were talking to your husband privately. You said what you meant." I was frustrated. I'd had a hard week and I said things I didn't mean the way they came out. "You said I was an old man who could afford his own place." That was accurate. The rest was your frustration speaking. I've separated the two. Silence. "So, what do we do now? With the loan, with everything, Daniel isn't sleeping." Her voice tightened. "I made a mistake. What do I have to do to fix this?" "That's not really a question for me," I said. "That's a question for Daniel." I ended the call. I want to be honest about something. There were moments during those weeks when I questioned the method, if not the principle. I had a long conversation with my older brother, a retired judge in Flagstaff who had known me since before I had money. I drove up on a Sunday and we sat on his back porch, and I told him everything. He listened without interrupting, which he was good at. When I finished, he was quiet for a minute. Then he said, "Are you trying to punish them or teach them?" I thought about that. Teach them, I said. If I wanted to punish them, I'd have called in the full amount and let them lose the house. He nodded. Then make sure the lesson has an ending they can learn from. Lessons without a door out are just punishment wearing a different name. I drove home thinking about that. By the time I got back to Arcadia, I knew what the terms would be. Margaret called the next morning to tell me Daniel had left a message at her office requesting a meeting. I told her to set it up for the following Thursday. Neutral location. My choice. I chose a restaurant in central Scottsdale, where I'd eaten 100 business lunches over 30 years. White tablecloths, good natural light, the kind of place where people say difficult things quietly. I arrived first, which I always did, and ordered coffee, and waited. Daniel came alone. He'd lost weight in his face. His sport coat looked like it belonged to someone slightly larger. He sat down across from me and put both hands flat on the table the way men do when they're trying to look steady. "Dad," he said. "Daniel, I owe you more than an apology for the loan. I owe you one for how you were treated in our house." I waited. Carol told me what she said. The old man comment. The blog shoot. He shook his head. I knew she was frustrated, but I didn't know she'd said it like that. And I should have been paying more attention. You came to our house to recover from surgery, and we made you feel like you were in the way. You did, I said. You did make me feel that way. He accepted this without flinching. That was something. I'm sorry, genuinely. Not because of the money, not because of the letter, because it was wrong. Can I ask you something? He nodded. If I had sold the business for $2 million, the way you assumed, if I was a man of modest means living in a condo, would you have made me leave? He was very still for a moment. I don't know. I want to say no, but I don't know. The honesty cost him something. I could see it. It was the right answer. That's the problem, Daniel. You don't know, and I needed to know. I reached into my jacket and laid a folder on the table. He looked at it but didn't reach for it. The loan balance is $162,000, I said. You've assembled $94,000 between your equity line, your savings, and what you borrowed from Carol's parents. That's close to what you owe in principal, if we set aside the interest. We can get the rest. It'll take time, but I'm not asking for the rest, I said. I'm offering a settlement. He looked up. You pay me the $94,000. I forgive the remaining $68,000. The loan is closed. I tapped the folder. In exchange for conditions. First, you and Carol begin couples counseling within 30 days. I'm not interested in your marriage's details. I am interested in whether you've both thought seriously about how you treated another person. Second, you tell the truth about what happened to anyone who asks. Not a social media post, not a press release. If someone in your family or your circle asks you directly, you tell them. Third, my will changes. Currently, you're listed to receive a significant portion of my estate. Going forward, you and Carol will each receive $100,000. The remainder goes to charity and to a trust for any grandchildren I may eventually have. Fourth, and this one is non-negotiable. You never again make any person in this family feel that their value is conditional on their financial utility. That includes me. That includes any children you have. That includes Carol's parents when they age. No exceptions. He'd gone pale in the way people go pale when math meets reality. The will, he said. How much were we? How much was in it before? That's not relevant to the conditions, I said. Dad, he swallowed. How much do you actually have? I looked at him for a moment. Then I slid the second page from the folder across the table. The most recent portfolio summary. Margaret had printed it that morning. His eyes moved across the page. Stopped. Moved back to the top. Read it again. 11 million, he said. It wasn't quite a question. 11.2 approximately. The business sold for more than I told you. I invested conservatively. It grew. He set the paper down. All those years. Living in that condo. The old pickup. Testing, I said simply. Watching who you and Carol were when you thought the money was ordinary. I got a clear answer. He was quiet for a long time. The restaurant moved around us. Waitstaff and conversations and the sound of a city at lunch. What would you have done, he finally said, if we'd treated you well? If Carol had never said that? I'd have told you the real number eventually. Left you provided for. Maybe bought a house closer to you so we could actually spend time together. I paused. There were versions of this that went differently. "I know," he said quietly. "I know that." I told him he had 48 hours to consider the terms. He could accept and we would move forward with the framework I described. He could decline and Margaret would proceed with the original collection timeline. He called me 16 hours later. "We accept," he said. "All 4 conditions." I said I would have Margaret draw up the paperwork. Before he hung up, he said, "I need to ask you something, and I need an honest answer." "Go ahead." "Is there any part of you that's willing to have a real relationship with us again? Not contractual, not supervised. Actually real?" I thought about the conversation with my brother. Lessons with a door out. "That depends entirely on what you do next," I said. "Words are the cheapest thing either of us owns right now. I'll be watching what you do." The formal apology happened at my brother's house in Flagstaff, his idea, 6 weeks after the restaurant meeting. A small gathering, 12 people, family who'd known us both for decades. Daniel stood in the living room with Carol beside him and said what needed to be said. No dramatic speech, just the facts, plainly stated. His father had come to recover from surgery. He had been made to feel unwanted. He had overheard things that should never have been said. He was sorry, and he understood that sorry was the starting point, not the ending point. Carol spoke second. Her voice didn't shake, which I respected. I said something unforgivable about a man who had never been anything but generous to us. I was comfortable and selfish, and I didn't see it until it cost us everything except the thing that actually matters, which is that Daniel's father is still here and still willing to talk to us at all. I am grateful for that. I don't expect it to be easy. I just want to be honest that I understand what I did. My brother caught my eye across the room. I gave him a small nod. The counseling started the following month. I knew because Daniel mentioned it without being prompted one afternoon when he called to tell me about a leak in their kitchen ceiling. It was such a normal call, a son calling his father about a plumbing problem, that I sat with it for a moment after I hung up. The trust fund was established in July. I worked with Margaret to set it aside cleanly, separate from the rest of the estate, protected from any future decisions either of us might make under pressure or grief or anger. If Daniel and Carol had children, those children would have something solid waiting for them at 25, regardless of what happened between their parents and me. I started a mentorship program at a community college in Tempe that fall. Manufacturing and small business, talking to students who were building something from the ground up the way I had. Some of them reminded me of myself at 28, hungry and not quite sure the hunger was warranted. I told them it was. I told them that the most valuable thing you build in business is not the product. It's the proof that you can sustain something through difficulty. By November, I had a routine that was genuinely mine. Coffee on the courtyard patio at 6:30, the fountain running, the desert cooling into its short version of winter. Mentoring sessions on Tuesdays. Dinner with my brother the last Sunday of every month. Occasional calls with Daniel that gradually lost their careful quality and started to sound like conversations again. Carol sent me a text in December. Not an apology. She'd already done that. Just a photo, the guest room in their house, repainted and refurnished. A real guest room now, with actual overnight guests. Her mother had visited for a month. She added a line below the photo. "We're trying to be the kind of people who deserve the relationships we want." I showed the text to my brother the next time I saw him. He read it and handed my phone back. "You think she means it?" he asked. "I think she's starting to," I said. "That's enough for now." I had been carrying the weight of that test for years before Daniel called about the surgery. The watching, the waiting, the quiet accumulation of evidence. I had wanted to be wrong. I had wanted to discover that my son and his wife valued me for something other than what I could provide financially. I had prepared for the worst and hoped for the best, and when the worst arrived I had been ready because I had always been ready. That was the habit of 30 years building something out of nothing. What I did not prepare for was how long it would take to set the weight down afterward, even after the house in Arcadia. Even after the terms were signed and the apology given and the trust fund established and the calls started sounding normal, some mornings I would sit on the courtyard patio and feel the exact shape of the thing I had lost. Not the money, not the trust, but the uncomplicated version of my son I had wanted to believe in even when the evidence was mounting. That version was gone, but Daniel was still here, imperfect and chastened and trying. And trying, I'd learned a long time ago in the manufacturing business, was not nothing. Trying was often where the important work actually happened. I drove to their house one Saturday in January, first visit since leaving. Daniel met me at the door. We shook hands. Then, after a beat, we did something we hadn't done in years. We hugged. Brief, slightly awkward, real. Carol made coffee. We sat in the kitchen and talked about nothing consequential for 2 hours. The plumbing situation, a project of Daniel's that was going well, a course I was teaching in the spring. When I left, I sat in the truck for a moment in their driveway before starting the engine. The golf community looked the same as it always had, clean and well-maintained and expensive in a careful way. Nothing had changed about its appearance. Everything had changed about what I understood when I looked at it. I drove home to Arcadia with the windows down. The January desert was cool and clear, the kind of afternoon that reminded you why people came here and stayed. My house was visible from the end of the cul-de-sac, white stucco catching the late sun, the courtyard fountain audible even from the street. My house, my terms, my peace. I had not set out to be a man who tested his own son. I had set out to be a father. But fathers are also men who have built things and lost things and know the difference between a relationship and an arrangement. What I had with Daniel and Carol had been an arrangement, comfortable and transactional, until I made it cost something. Now we were finding out what was underneath the arrangement. Whether there was something real below it, the evidence was still coming in. I was still watching. But the fountain was running and the mountains were turning red in the evening light, and I was 67 years old, in a house I had chosen for myself, and for the first time in a very long time, I did not feel like a burden or a guest or a convenience. I felt like a man who had come home. If this story meant something to you, please like the video and subscribe to Honest Revenge Stories. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done differently? And what time is it where you are right now?